Hi, welcome to the podcast number 4 of TechStory. My name is Amir Siddiq, and our guest today is Mohammad Nasrullah, popularly known as Nash. Let me tell you how I feel about today's podcast. It's a scoop. A scoop in journalism is a big story, which has a lot of drama, which has a lot of interesting, details about it. So Nash here is a graduate of GIK. After that, he founded a big company, PringIt, which was dealing with SMS, and that was a competitor of Chopal and Simobo. And after that, he was working at Convo, where we all know a little bit of mess happened, and he will probably talk about that. And right now, he is founder of Integry, and Integry recently has raised 1 million US dollar investment, and he is based in Silicon Valley. Uh, Welcome to the show, Dash.
Thank you so much. Pleasure having to be here.
Thank you very much. So let's just start because I have a lot of questions for you. Uh, it's, it's very interesting when I checked your background. You did your undergrad from GIK from 2001 to 2005, right? And and I went to LUMS, and we guys at LUMS, sort of have that superiority complex, sort of, that we guys at LUMS, we are a liberal arts school. We study a lot of history, philosophy, and social sciences and all that. And somehow we are a better, well-rounded individuals than a lot of engineering universities. It's a joke that we do. And interestingly, I've been proven wrong lately because when I read your profile and the other guys who have founded universities, founded companies from the GIK graduates, and when I read your Twitter feed and when I read your work, there's a lot of philosophy there. I mean, you guys are like, talk a little about that. Is it a bit of an advantage that you study a lot of engineering stuff, and then you discover those things after graduation, or during university you have a lot of exposure to all these philosophy, sociology, and activism as well?
Got it. So just a bit of clarification. I was in GIK from 2000 to 2004. Um, and I will say this, in today's age, there is no set path. You can be an entrepreneur, you can be a founder from any background. You can be a designer, like the guys at Airbnb who became really big in that area. You could be a developer, you can be a business guy. And so there are many paths to success. There is no one size fits all. I'll give you my point of view on this whole thing. I feel that doing a hard bachelor's, for example, an engineering bachelor's, or like a medical, like being a doctor, doing a medical MBBS, something like that, it is harder to do that. And then it's easier to teach an engineer, let's say management, or it's easier to teach a doctor management than the other way around. It's harder to teach like a business background, a hard tech like engineering, or from a medical thing and all that. So typically I feel if you have to go down a path, it's is typically better in that way. That being said, there are lots of advantages of having people who have like a philosophical background, having a non-technical background. Some of the best people I work with are non-technical people, and their background and their insight is invaluable. So it's not like one is typically better than the other. I think there are just different things, which different pieces of a puzzle which make this whole.
Very interesting, very interesting. So talk a little about your time at GIK and how that shaped your life.
So I've always wanted to be an engineer. I've been deep into programming, and it's very funny. I was born in Saudi Arabia, and while growing up in Saudi Arabia, and back in the day, this is in the early 90s and even 80s. Saudi didn't really have a really good engineering university, or even like a good higher education standard. So growing up in the Pakistani community, there was always this sense that you have to go to a good university in Pakistan. And I don't know where this came in from, but the understanding was if you're going to be an engineer, then you got to go to GIKI. This is like again late 90s, and I still think about this, and I don't know where that came from. I don't I didn't know anybody from GIK, but there was just sort of this thinking that GIK was number one in the private university ranking, and so that was the goal. And if you were a kid in the early 90s, our heroes were at that time was Bill Gates. To me, definitely it was. And the reason was at that time, Steve Jobs sort of had became relegated. He wasn't really that much in the news. He was doing this next thing, and he was sort of like a has been at that stage. And Microsoft had this humongous student and university outreach program, the student ambassadors and all that stuff. And so everybody knew about Bill Gates, but Bill Gates was special because here was a guy who, using just his intelligence, became the world's richest guy. And I'm simplifying. There are many other things which goes into that, but that was sort of my idealistic view. I'm like, if Bill Gates can do it, so can I, right? I should be able to uh, build a computer company and do all of that. So that sort of was the inspiration. So I always wanted to go into computer science, and so GIK sort of became the primary way of doing that. Even before GIK, I used to be used to love to program. I'm a self-taught programmer. I'm an autodidact when it comes to that. And so GIK is very unique in the sense that it is on top of this mountain. It is away from human civilization. There is no concept of day scholars. You have to live at GIKI, but it's also very posh. It's very elite. You get your own private room. You get your own private bathroom. It's like a high-end, high-quality place. It's like okay. And so what that taught us was away from civilization, living in solitude. You get to spend a lot of time reflecting either on your craft or just working on the things which just focusing on yourself. Because शहर में जब होता है, like for example, you mentioned lumps. I used to meet friends at lumps and they were so busy all the time. कभी यहाँ party हो रही, कभी यहाँ पे मिल रहे हैं, कभी get together है. In GIK, there was none of that, right? And so we had to create our own little distraction. So it became very common for us to do these Pakistan level events. We would have these what we called all Pakistan. We'd have programming competitions. We'd have these drama competitions, and JIK is a very small community. Like ek to saal hota JIK ka 1 year is has barely 200 students, and so we have barely a population of 1,000 students. And so we used to get so distracted, we would focus on these event management and competitions and all that stuff. And so, but that really helped us become well-rounded. We would understand how to raise funding, how to get sponsorships, how to arrange logistics for a national level event, what is hospitality, how to treat people, how to do all that stuff. Everything other than the engineering part, right? Excuse me. I think that really sort of informed us of what a lot of the skills that we learned from that really helped us in becoming more broader people than we would have done then, let's say, at a typical engineering school in any other place in Pakistan. I'd say isolation really helps you think through a lot of the issues in life.
Yeah, very interesting. So you get a lot of time with no distraction from the city life, no friends and family calling you every hour, sort of, and you have a lot of time, get a lot of time to work on your craft and organize those events, because these are the only socializing opportunities that you have there. So moving on, you worked at Ericsson and then you started PringIt. I'm sure you are aware that my first podcast was with Asim Fayaz, and the third podcast was with Ali Rehan. Both of them worked at Chopal for some time. And then there was another competitor of PringIt that was, Simobo, but earlier it was called Mango Party, started by Confiz. Talk a little about what was your inspiration of starting PringIt, and which of the guys from these three companies started it earlier and did it really well?
Right. So I was from the telecom background. You rightly said I used to work at Ericsson, and in Ericsson, I was the solution architect. Ericsson used to service one of the main customers called Varid, which is now acquired by Mobilink. And we were responsible for expansion. And I entered when we were doing phase 3, phase 4 expansion, which was we literally just added 6.5 million more subscribers. So I think Varid went from some 5 million to 11.5 million subscribers. And we were adding so many subscribers. Pakistan was seeing this unprecedented growth in telecom under the Musharraf regime. We were looking at all of this telecom regulation. And I was talking to a friend of mine, he was my class fellow from GIKI, Umar Farouk, and And I just said, there is so much infrastructure you're putting up, but there's really no services on top of this. So if you're a business, how do you use SMS for communication? How do you use texting to deliver services, voice to deliver services? And at the same time, there was this whole new evolution, the Web 2.0. And Web 2.0 was very different from the Web 1.0. Web 1.0 was all about building things yourself. Web 2.0 was like YouTube and Facebook. So YouTube does not make any videos, Facebook does not make any content. And so that was our idea. We said, wouldn't it be great? Instead of these little hadith a day service, yeah, prayer timing service, what if we make this platform where anybody can come in, they can create a profile, and they can just sign up, and they can sort of, just basically move the content creation from us to the end user. That was sort of the idea. And this is very early on. And at that very same time, there was another company which had the same concept. It was called Twitter, and so I realized very early on that Twitter is doing something which we were also doing, and that's one of the reasons I'm a very early user. I'm like user number 800. That's why my username on Twitter is Nash, because nobody had heard of Twitter, nobody really understood it, but we understood that this was going to be a big deal. And Twitter actually started as an SMS service as well, and later it became a web-based thing. But Shurumate was, and that's where the 140 character limit comes from. And SMS is 160 characters. Excuse me. And so what happened was Twitter and Facebook were growing, but what was happening was the only people who were on Twitter and Facebook were people who had smartphones or people who had access to the internet. And so most time the population online for Facebook and social media was maybe 2 million, 3 million people. And what really bothered us, or what bothered me personally, was that there was this elite conversation happening. So they're like these very rich people who have access to technology. But what about all these other people who have access to feature phones and other things? Why aren't they part of this national conversation? So we created Pring. So Pring, the idea of Pring was anybody should be able to join this conversation, should be able to become a broadcaster, should be able to send and receive messages. And that's when we started the whole thing. We're very careful about the name. We're very careful about the identity. In India, there was another service called SMS Gupshup. In Pakistan, there was Chupal, then it eventually became SMS All. And both of these names I didn't like. All three of these names, Chupal was a nice name though, but SMS All, and it's too descriptive and all. But anyway, and so we always wanted to have to basically democratize telecom. So we had a really fantastic API. Anybody can come and build bots on top of the system. Anybody could create, integrate. So we also arranged one of Pakistan's first hackathon. I remember we arranged one in GIKI. We went there, we gave them the API, and within one day, the student built a system where you could just send your current location and the final location. It would send you text directions. यहाँ पे ये turn ले, ये turn ले, ये turn ले. Another kid made a very simple, just SMS your location. It will tell you the prayer timings and so on. And it was really nice seeing this early Twilio sort of a thing, जो कि अब US के अंदर है, and so on so करके. And so that's the sort of the genesis, all that. We eventually reached around 8 million users. Sorry, so we were just in terms of history. I left Rickson. We started this company with my batchmate from GIK, Umar Farouk, and we started this company called ByteSense. ByteSense became like a telecom service provider company. We tried different experiments, and then we decided we wanted to bring. We talked to the parent company of the Pan-Asian Group, of Rickson, which is the Pan-Asian Group. Pan-Asian Group owns Rickson, Bombardier, Volvo, Hilti in Pakistan. And so they ended up acquiring our company. And over the course of 5 years, they put in $2 million inside Pring. And so
Really, really. So they acquired
yeah,
in what year were they acquiring you? I mean,
this is anywhere between 2000. You'll have to check my LinkedIn for exact numbers, but excuse me. This is early. This is 2007, 8 or 9, somewhere around that.
so you guys sort of
And so
sold them. You guys sold them 100% equity.
So no, so one of the reasons that I want to do this podcast is sort of to be able to explain some of the lessons I've learned. And so if there's a future entrepreneur watching this, I want them to be able to learn this, right? We gave away majority of the company. So by the time we gave the company, we were down to 15% of shares in the company. And so we gave away 85% of the company. Now, you have to keep in mind, there is no VC in Pakistan. There is no investor, quote unquote, in Pakistan. These are private groups. These are people who are, so the Pination group was phenomenal, was fantastic group of people who saw this young company who believed in the potential and sort of worked on with us to be able to do that. Um, but the some of the things that we did wrong here, and I think you'll see this recurring lesson is when you don't have options, you end up signing on with whatever deal that you have, right? And so, in today's term, if you ever in your first round give away 85% of your company, no other investor is ever going to work with you. You, as far as the company is concerned, you are now acquired. Essentially, you're acquired, and now you are in complete control of another entity. So, हमारे साथ भी हुआ. We basically ended up giving super voting rights to this singular investor. And it's not bad. Typically, इसमें issue कोई नहीं होता. लेकिन होता क्या कि the general rule is when things are going well, the entrepreneur is in control. When things are not going well, the investors are in control, right? And and this is very common. So if things go bad, investors tend to come and say, okay. And it went really well for 4 or 5 years. I personally feel that we as the management team or we as the individual founders had very large ambitions. We wanted to do a lot more stuff. We had a whole transition plan between texting and moving towards an app, towards moving towards. We always had a web interface, but we had a really fantastic app idea. We were basically becoming an early version of WhatsApp, early version of Line Messenger, but we needed funding for that. And our main funding party had financial constraints, and they came in such a bad time that they couldn't fund us anymore. And so things
So
sort of
Nash, sorry to
but
interrupt. So let me just,
yeah.
make sure I understand it well. You guys give up 85% of the company in return of a fixed amount of money, or these guys kept on pouring in money at different intervals of time?
So we became a company under the Pination Group, and so the way that the group works is that every year there's a budget. Every year you give projections and you give a budget, and they keep on putting in money. So, for example, over the course of 5 years, I'd say they put in about $2.1 million within the company. But the initial understanding was that we would become an acquired entity. We would still maintain some minority shares in the company. We would be salaried individuals, and so we shifted to a salary, and so that's sort of how it was. So the money invested was over a period of 5 years or so.
So I can, from the word go, I can see it's a horribly structured deal, because you guys, when you have just 15%, you don't have that incentive to go full throttle and go after Twitter and big companies. And although you had that, you had that opportunity, in my opinion. And when you have just 15%, I mean, before that, I'm always interested in numbers. Can you tell me, for their $2 million, how much they must have made in an entire course of the company?
So, so just to backtrack over there, you have to always look at things within their context and their alternatives. So, excuse me, to do $2 million in early 2000s and early pre 2010s, it was unheard of. No tech company had sort of done that purely for a product-based company. And so the alternative was that this might not really have survived. Pring would not have existed without having that funding. And I think, given if those were the options, giving away 85% of the company was still a better decision versus not having that, right? And again, this goes back to my point about what is the concept of a BATNA, a BATNA, which is a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And so we didn't have that, but anyway. And so in terms of revenue, so you have to understand a social network by definition suffers from the egg and chicken problem. You need to have enough investment put in to grow large enough. You need to have a large number of users before you can start monetization. So initially it is very capital intensive. You have to grow the user base. We started really slow, but eventually in the last year we had, when we started really monetizing, we hired like the head of sales and stuff like that. And I think I don't have the numbers on top of my head, but I don't think we ever went beyond maybe a total of $200,000 in the last year, something like that. But it was nowhere near the full potential. However, it was growing rapidly. Excuse me. We would have like a large number of users, like anywhere between 3,000 to 5,000 users signing up a day, and so on. And so at peak, I think we had 8,000 to 12,000 people signing up every day, and so on. But it wasn't really there in terms of financials. it would have taken at least another 3 to 5 years to fully realize its potential. But directionally or trajectionally, you could see the trajectory was heading towards that.
So, did that, I mean, after you, I mean, I'm just, fast forwarding a little bit. I'll come back later on. But, why and, how did you leave that company and under what circumstances? And then after that, what became of that company?
So what happened was, as I mentioned, that the main group had other financial projects it had going on, which certainly had a huge financial requirement. And so they had to decide that they basically come back and said, we unfortunately will not be able to fund it for the next year, and we need to look for alternative investment and so on. And so what we did was we went around. I think in a course of 30 days, I went and talked to 100 potential investors in Pakistan. I talked to any person in Pakistan who had any sort of amount of who had made any money. I talked to all these players, and some of the best people I found was Monas was a really good person who I thought was a really good sort of a match. So Monas is one of the original entrepreneurs in Pakistan in the sense that he made .com money, like he made money from a website. And so Monas really knew sales, and we knew that our key problem was sales going forward, and we needed somebody to do that. So I put together a deal with Monas that Monas is going to come in, is going to acquire the company, and so it's going to become independent and so on. And also Monas understood the same thing you just said. He said, I want to give you more equity. I want you to sort of take over stuff. Okay. However, and this is a bit of history, but before we were selling Pring, we had a really good deal that we put together. It was more of a $3 million, a $5 million investment deal that we had put in as the next round of funding. The founders did that. But for a variety of reasons, our board didn't go ahead with that, or they had trouble closing that deal. And as a result, from there, instead of raising $5 million, we ended up with a deal where Pring would be sold, and they would put in $100,000 or some small amount like that. And at that time, I felt like this is a reset of everything that we've done. Like this is us going back 5 years with a small budget. And because the focus was on commercialization, so the focus was more, forget the social network because that's expensive to maintain. Let's make this into a nice API-based SMS service like Twilio. And I didn't really have that much interest in that. And Monas, to his credit, he said, Nash, it's entirely up to you. It is your call if you want to go into this or not. And so he was very transparent with the whole thing. And I ultimately decided, I said, agar humne sirf isko as a SMS service banana, so you need a middle manager, you can do that. You don't need somebody like me who's expensive and all that to be able to do that. And Monas ki tha ki, look, let's just solve the financial problem first, and then we can figure out to do more things in that. But after spending about 5 years at Pring, I didn't want to wait more. I also became impatient with where Pring was and so on. And so ideally what would have happened, not ideally, but with me pulling out, what would have happened was Monas would have said, okay, no deal. But interestingly, Monas said, nee, I'm going to take this forward. And so Monas and the Seam Networks went ahead. I'm not sure under what legal entity, but they went ahead and they acquired Pring. And so Pring was acquired. It was a down round, and the financial fine details, I'm not privy to that. Monas would be. And so they acquired Pring. And so that sort of became part of one of the companies under the Seam Networks and so on. And so I had been doing companies at that point for the last 10 years. And so I started with ByteSense right after, after Ixon, I did ByteSense, and ByteSense was acquired, became Pring. And so I sort of got burned out. And so for the next adventure, I wanted to work at an international company. I didn't want to work at a Pakistan-focused company. And so that's where I sort of joined Convo. And that's sort of where the next chapter sort of began.
So, the reason I was calling this interview a scoop is because I'm interested in that Convo story. What happened there? We had a world-renowned investor in the shape of, I believe, Umar Rashid is his name, the guy of Chegg. He invested in a GIK alumni founded company, Convo, and later on there is a mess there. I mean, can talk a little about that. What happened there?
So Convo was founded by this brilliant product designer, Fazan Puzdar. He's a senior of mine from GIKI, and by who's now his wife, but back then she was the co-founder, Sabika. And Fazan single-handedly create this whole category of what is known as enterprise social networks. It's basically, think of it as Facebook for your own organization. And those the and I really do mean that the team was such a great for our team that the decisions they took back then are still decisions which stand today. So even today, as Integry, how internally we use Convo for all of our communication, because there really isn't a better tool than Convo in the market yet. And I use every tool, Slack for everything. It's like, okay. Um, and so one of my goals always has been in my life has been, okay, how can I help and support Pakistan? And so I've been interviewed by Microsoft Seattle. I've turned down job offers from the West. I've always constantly avoided leaving the country. And when I look back, I'm like, yeah, that was such a bad decision. I should have left when I could, right? Um, but then here was Fizan. What Fizan had done was he had built this internationally acclaimed company, and all the funding they raised majorly came to Pakistan. And so he was able to bring an impact in Pakistan while being abroad, right? So he sort of did the best of both worlds. And I looked at that, I'm like, that's what I want to learn. I thought that was the future for Pakistan. You build a company which is a global company, which has backends in Pakistan. And so you have a team in Pakistan, and so you still bring about impact. And if you look at the whole Tata, Infosys, Satyam, that's sort of how that has worked as well. And so so I talked to Fizan. They knew about Pring. They knew that I was exiting Pring. And so I talked to Sharia Hadri, who was CEO at Convo, and I really liked Fizan. And Fizan was a phenomenal sort of CEO. And so I joined in as VP of engineering. And I think, and I still think that Convo had a really fantastic team and so on. And what happened was, and this is again that same story we just was telling you. Entrepreneurs are in control when things are going well. Investors are in control when things aren't going well, right? The problem with the original team at Convo was that while they had done a tremendous job of building a really phenomenal product, they had a significant gap of sales and business development in the team. So there was really no person or sort of no, and they kept on hiring people in that role, but it was never successful. And so as a result, ये हुआ था कि Convo missed out a number of opportunities in terms of capturing the market. तो हमारे सामने ही Yammer बना. Yammer was at Twitter for work. It was acquired by Microsoft for I forget, but some ridiculous number like $1.5 billion. But when they got acquired, I think they had like a $65 million revenue, something like that. And so you could see all these companies doing a really phenomenal job with that. And Convo had everything. Was better than Yammer from Microsoft, is better than Salesforce. And investors saw that too. And I think, and I will tell you this, in 2020, in 2021, it is very, very rare for investors, for a venture capital firm to change management of a seed or a Series A company. Uski wajah ye कि the company is too young. And if things aren't going well, you want to give the entrepreneurs more time. And if you as a VC remove the CEO that early, let's say Karangi, they're not really performing well, the VC would be within their rights. Unke rights hote hain, they can do that. However, it would be deeply unpopular because they know कि उन्होंने मजीद companies को fund करना है, and no company is going to come to them, no founder is going to come to them and say, yeah, these guys, if I don't perform well, these guys are going to kick me out, right? So it is so modern VCs do not do this. Like in case of Convo, ये हुआ था कि as Convo did not hit its performance goals, and this is my sense of the situation, there was more and more pressure from the existing investors कि यार इसको you need to do better job at sales तक करके. And as a result, if the company isn't growing, it's also hard to raise a funding round. And I do feel that Convo wasn't really able to raise money from at that time from the right people, the people they wanted to. And instead, what they did was, कि जो existing investors थे, they went back to them, and the existing investors saw that things are not going very well, so they basically took on terms where they had what is essentially super rights, super voting rights, and things like that. Now, like I said, it's very rare for investors to exercise these rights for such an early company. And historically, hota raha. Like Cisco ki kahani padhe, Valentine, he fired the wife and husband team. And I mean, their history is full of these stories.
Steve Jobs was fired from his company. Was that a similar situation? Yeah.
बिल्कुल. again, and those so the Bill Gates, sorry, the Steve Jobs story is looked upon as a historically bad decision from the board. However, Steve Jobs wouldn't have been Steve Jobs had he had not left the company. And then, the second coming of Steve Jobs. If you look at Steve Jobs' life, it's in three phases. That second phase of self-reflection and then becoming a great CEO in Act Three would not have happened if he didn't go through it. Anyway. The Cisco story is different. The year they fired the founders, I think the company did barely $1 million. The next year they did like almost like $50 million. So that was the right decision by the VC and all that. But anyway, so it becomes a bigger question. The question is, if a company isn't doing well, what is the responsibility of you if you're an entrepreneur, if you're not doing well, and there's going to be pressure from your board, there's going to be pressure from investors. What should you do, and what should investors do? So first and foremost, as CEO, I look at things that I am mainly subservient to my board, and my board is basically appointed by my stakeholders. So all the people I've taken money from, मैं उनको जवाब दूं. I'm answerable to them, right? And if I don't have a really good answer, they are well within their rights to ask me to step down. So that's number one. It's rare, but that's their right. So if an investor asks me to step down, they're not asking for anything illegal. That is within their rights. Now, I would say कि legal bar बहुत low होता है. There has to be a higher bar of ethics. There has to be a higher bar of morality. इस तरह की सारी चीजें होती हैं. Um, if I truly believe कि मैं काम ठीक नहीं कर रहा as CEO, it is also my responsibility to my team कि I should then say कि अच्छा, here are the problems in the company. I am not the best person, and let's look for a better person or something like that. Now, without going into too much detail, this is the sort of conversation that was happening between the management and the investors who had these rights. They had the ability to remove them, and it sort of became really messy. Apparently, the management team didn't want to leave, and the investors wanted better performance, which is like a story as old as time with companies that aren't performing. And one thing led to another. The investors decided to pull their essential super voting rights or whatever that they had, and they basically asked Fazan to step down, and essentially they did a management change. And there was a lot of effort into keeping him on board, but the terms never really worked out. And obviously, you have to understand that building company is a deeply personal
No,
affair.
no, I
It is your
understand. I
baby.
understand. I understand
Yeah,
that it is well in everyone's right because, as an entrepreneur, it's okay if something is not working. You want the right man for the right job. It's not about the egos.
yeah.
It's about growing the company, right? But in Convo, what we hear is happened is that the company employees sort of split in two in that sort of political tussle. Was it like that? It became a little political, and the employees were divided into two groups.
No, I think it's not that the employees were divided into groups. I think there was very clearly the management and then everybody else. And most of the employees were really kept in the dark about the actual struggle happening between the investors and the management. And we didn't have any visibility because most of this fight was taking place in the US. And by the time I was leaving the company, I had left the company, and I was in just sort of doing in my serving. I had decided to start my next company. I knew Convo was going through its tough period. I waited for as long as I could because I knew they were doing a fundraise. I didn't want a senior person to leave during their fundraise. I didn't want to impact any of those things. But I had given my resignation a good 3-4 months in advance, before all of this whole thing hit the fan. Um, what I will say is the things that went wrong was that it was a US company. Econ was a US company, and then they had a wholly owned subsidiary in Pakistan. And once they changed the CEO legally, so when Usman, the investor who is now CEO, when he became the CEO of Convo Inc. US, they automatically he became the head of executive of Pakistan. But the Pakistan management said कि नहीं जी हम नहीं मानते, we're not giving you the company, which was I think was a really wrong thing to do. It was definitely an illegal thing for them to do.
What were they hoping
And
to
so till
achieve?
this,
What were they hoping to achieve by denying the major shareholder? I believe
so
Umar Rashid would have been a major shareholder. Is that right?
Usman Rashid, yes, absolutely. And it was like a very naive thing. I think they essentially thought that they can keep the company essentially hostage from
Oh.
the CEO of the company. And it was very weird because all the finances, all the money is in the US bank account. So the CEO still control. So The CEO controls all of that. These guys took over the servers and stuff like that.
It's like a suicide jacket, a guy holding suicide jacket in Islamabad. I'm not going to let anyone play with it, and not realizing
Yeah.
that it's a big company. Like you said, it was better than Yammer. It had a lot of potential.
Yeah.
So moving forward, now I hope now when the Usman is on the helm and the company is back on track, is it soaring in terms of that? Is it doing really well now? Has it catch up, or what's the state of things there?
I think that's a better question to ask Usman Stagarke, but I would say that again, compared to Yammer, compared to Salesforce, compared to the revenue this company can make even today, I feel with COVID, for us, for example, Integry, we are a distributed company. We don't have a central office. Convo is the connecting tissue. It's like a very important part of how we work. And I've seen so many tools. None of the tools is able to do what Convo does today. It is not where it can be. It is. I think it has a huge potential. But I think it's
So
in.
what is the defining feature of Convo that is the most useful for you? What is the defining feature? Because yeah.
Right. So if you look at most communication tools, for example, email or even chat, the problem with these tools is that, for example, if you and I both work in a company and you're sending emails between us, the day I leave, all of my emails value goes to zero, right? But in Convo, क्या होता है कि all the communication always remains searchable. It is organized. So, for example, you make posts and you make comments and stuff. करके. So, if a new person comes in, they can go through all of my communication history. They can go through and see what are my communication with the customer. They can see different products I worked on. So, होता क्या, it becomes like an automatic knowledge management system. Most knowledge management systems का मसला क्या होता है कि they separate the communication from the knowledge. So, for example, Google Docs is technically knowledge management, but it does not have communication. What Convo has, it has this brilliant concept of a news feed like Facebook. You can see what's happening at the company. There's a great notification system. There's a great like a posts and all that system. And then they have a really cool feature called in-context collaboration. So you can basically literally attach any document, and then you can comment on any part of that document. And so you're able to have a conversation as if you're sitting next to the person, and you can say, okay, this is what I'm talking about here. This is the thing I'm doing over there. And again, these are decisions the product team took in the very early days of Convo. And like I said, Convo started by a brilliant product team, which sort of failed to become a really great sales, marketing, and distribution team. So that I think distribution is what essentially became the downfall of the original team over there.
So like those sort of mistakes, like you said, in PringIt, you had some sort of lack of guidance, sort of a situation where you didn't make the best of decisions, and we see that happening at Convo as well. You went to the Alchemist Accelerator, right? Did these guys help you a lot in managing your next startup, which is Integry? Did you learn there a lot? Are they helping you?
100%. 100%. So you have to understand that when it comes, even today, aaj bhi dekh lena, if you look at the investment rounds in Pakistan, up until 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would classify them as almost predatory. Like they will take 50% of the company, terrible round, small amount of funding, and they'll sort of ask you for a pound of flesh. And this was true 10 years ago, and then even 5 years ago. अभी भी आपके लोकल राउंड देखेंगे, उसकी जो वैल्यूएशन होती है, जो उसकी फंडिंग होती है, is very different from the funding you would get in the US. And so this is again that concept which I was talking about, Batna. When you have a lot of alternatives, you are able to get a better value. So for example, like Pakistan mein hai, if you have 10 investors and you have 10 term sheets, you're automatically going to pick the one which is the best value for you, right? And so as the word goes around, other founders will look at me and they say, Acha, that was a good investor. I'm going to go to them. So that's what happens. Eventually, a market khud correct ho jayegi. What happens in the valley is that because there are so many investors, and now unko cheez samajh aa chuki hai कि you don't want to mess with founders. You want to make sure you support founders, and you want to pick the. So आपने जितनी due diligence करनी है, background check करना है, investment से पहले कर ले. But once you put your money behind a founder, now you're married for life. And now, unless company like Uber है जिसके अंदर it's billions of dollars at risk, and now Uber they have to remove the CEO because there's so much money there. या फिर it is WeWork, उस तरह की fundamental भी मसला है. उस case में you might want to have change management, but even then it's very rare now to have anything like that. So that's one. Number two is कि US के अंदर अब ये है कि the terms are very friendly. They are extremely founder friendly. अब हमारी term sheets भी देखें जो हमने funding raise की है इस तरह देखें, it is not at all what it was 10 years ago. And it is the responsibility of the executive of the founding team to find the best deal that they can, to find the best investors that they can. But ultimately, वो जो डाइवर्सिटी है ना यूएस के अंदर, वो ना आपको यूरोप में नहीं मिलती, वो आपको मिडल ईस्ट में नहीं मिलती, वो आपको पाकिस्तान में नहीं मिलती. अब दैट इज चेंजिंग. द इन्वेस्टमेंट राउंड्स वी सी इवन टुडे, like Indus Capital ने किए हैं, जो आतिफ ने किए हैं, different companies की, there are far better terms than they were 10 years ago, 5 years ago. और उसकी वजह ये है कि these investors जो बाहर से हैं, इन्होंने बाहर से they've done different, they've worked with these larger VC firms in some capacity, and now they understood, जो उन्होंने लेसन सीखे ना वहाँ पे, कि अगर आपका फाउंडर इंटरेस्ट लूज कर जाता है, if the will of the founder, if you take 85% of the company, if the founders become just employees, they're just going after their paycheck, there is no upside, so they know कि जी उसका कोई खास outcome नहीं होना, right? So these are very hard earned lessons. They know कि जी Bill Gates या Steve Jobs को fire करना was a stupid thing, and Steve Jobs को वापस लेकर आना was the right thing, so on. So those lessons are now slowly so Alchemist क्या करता है? Alchemist or YC, जितनी भी companies हैं, what they do is कि they have a large portfolio of companies, and they're able to see hundreds of deals every year. They're able to see how investors are doing. They're able to see कि fundraising के numbers क्या चल रहे हैं, and they're able to give you phenomenal advice on how you should approach things. So even today, जो हमने fund raise किया है, हमें जो term sheet मिलती है, हम सबसे पहले ये करते हैं कि we send it to Alchemist. वहाँ पे जो उनके advisors होते हैं, there are people who are worth $100 million or more. They look at the term sheet and then they give us advice. We have an advisory board inside Alchemist. Hiring से लेके company structure, legal, they do all of the stuff for you. And this is true for YC, this is true for any good accelerator. And I say one of the best decisions, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're listening, one of the best decisions you can do is you should get into a high quality accelerator or an incubation program. चाहे वो YC है, चाहे वो Alchemist है, चाहे 500 startups है, there are many. It could short circuit and accelerate your learning by 10x. आप जो काम आपको 10 साल लगेंगे करने के अंदर, they will be able to do that in 3 months, 100%. It's a game changer.
That is a very good advice, because I'm paying attention. I'm running a small startup of my own. So can you guide me? What would be the best? What do you think are the best accelerators here in Pakistan, or for a person who wants to stay in Pakistan, what are the options that they have?
So it's a good question. I would say two things. You never want to work for someone who you cannot learn anything from. So the first thing I look at any accelerator or any investor is कि इनकी background क्या है? Have they done it? Have they built companies? Have they been operators? And if you look at that criteria, that disqualifies 95% of the investors in Pakistan. Um, that doesn't mean they're bad. It's just that there is not a lot of useful advice that you will get. And so what I prefer is working with investors or people who have experience. And so when I come to them with my actual problem, like मिसाल के तौर पे अगर आपने आज तक खुद फंड रेजिंग नहीं की हुई, आपको नहीं पता कि सेफ्स क्या होते हैं, इसमें गिव एंड टेक क्या होता है, कॉमन स्टॉक, प्रेफर्ड स्टॉक, there's so many decisions which comes in, you're not really going to be able to give me good advice, at least on those topics. However, लेकिन अगर आप एक अच्छे ऑपरेटर रह चुके हैं, मुराद ये कि if you've led the product team at a large company, you can give me really good advice on per उसकी बहुत अच्छी value है. So Pakistan में, I don't think there's really a great incubator or an accelerator in that sense. Champe, there's a management team that has built companies. I would say if you're a Pakistani, आपके global ambitions होने चाहिए हैं. मैं उस दिन देख रहा था, there was a report released by Magnet, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. उन्होंने summary दी थी कि 2020 में investments किसने किए हैं. One of the top two investors there are like 6 top investors here, but the top 2 investors में the number one was Bill and Gates Melinda Foundation के, I think Karan Das के नाम से है वो. They've done the highest number of investments. That's number one. I think they've done 10 investment in 2020. The second tier था companies that have done 4 or more investment. उसमें YC was there, right? उसमें YC था, उसमें Indus Capital था, उसमें Laxon Group था. ये 3-4 companies थी. And so if you're a Pakistani, get help from the people who have been there, done that, और वो US में आपको बहुत मिलेंगे. There is no reason why you cannot or should not try to get into YC in the US. You should not be able to get into 500 startups, because आपको वहां से जो learnings मिलेंगी ना, आपको पाकिस्तान में नहीं मिलेंगी. And Pakistan, that's what Pakistan needs. Pakistan needs osmosis of knowledge. कि वहां पे जो चीजें लोगों ने सीखी हैं, लोगों के कंधों पे खड़े होकर आप उस नॉलेज को यहाँ पे लेकर आए. And so
अच्छा.
I would advise for you to go out and do that.
Lekin Nash, the YC and the US, I get that point. You know, some of the best mentors who I get information from are here in Valley. For example, Adil Raza of Anler is a great mentor of mine. He's been helping me from last 5 years. He gives me the best advice, you know, like, and you know, I get that, but, you know, I am a small time entrepreneur. My revenues are in millions of rupees only. These YCA, these guys are not going to be interested in me at this stage. I mean, my approach or my game is that I am, you know, sort of learning this trade. I'll be doing, you know, the small startup, you know, where my numbers are small and I learn from that, and then I probably, you know, my next adventure would be probably larger in the millions. But realistically speaking, right now I'm a small player. But I still need help to grow, and that help should come from someone who is in Pakistan or who is interested in Pakistani market. Maybe some of you guys who have done it, you know, sort of reach out to guys like me. There'll be hundreds of them, you know, and who need advice and help. There has to be some mechanism, because, you know, a few years ago, nobody, I mean, part of the reason I started this podcast was to democratize this whole discussion, because, you know, the feeling that I got a few years ago was there were like small pockets of knowledge, and they were guarding their knowledge very well. But over time, you know, I want to democratize it. And what do you want to say to those middle level guys who are not that level of millions of dollars yet?
So I would say two things. One is that there are two types of businesses, and this is very important to understand. There are companies which are aiming to become high growth, fast growing companies. For example, any company in Pakistan, let's say you're trying to become a company which is going to really, like जो Pring हमने शुरू किया था, Pring में the idea was that if we're successful, we would become a go-to marketing channel on mobile. It will become the core channel for Pakistani companies to businesses to advertise on mobile, and that would be a multi-billion rupee business, right? So एक तो वो है. If that is your goal, if your goal is to become very large, if your goal is to become a large billions of rupees, even billions of dollars business, then your current size does not matter. Even if you have zero revenue, most of the YC companies जो fund होती हैं या जो जाती हैं, they have zero revenue, they are pre-revenue. Some companies are even pre-team, some companies are even pre-idea. जिनके पास idea भी नहीं होता. If you read the YCs के वो आपको बताएंगे. However, that is what is called a venture backable company. The other companies, जो कि 99% of the companies in the world are not venture backable. They are regular businesses. इनको हम कहते हैं cash based business. यानी आपने एक SME हो गया, एक दुकान होगी, इस तरह करके हो गया. All the advice which is for venture backable companies is 100% not for these SMBs. SMB की treatment तरीका चलाने का is very different from a venture backed company. And so you have to be careful and when you're listening to advice. So this advice, all the thing we're talking about, the assumption is you're looking to do a large company, a venture backable company. तो उसके लिए तो you go to accelerator से करके. अगर आप एक regular business करें ना, and that could be an online business, an e-commerce store, उसकी जो setup advice is very different. उसके लिए, so that's interesting. उसके लिए accelerators आना शुरू हो गए हैं. So for example, there are a few well-known people now like Dan Martel. If you go to danmartel.com, he is a entrepreneur who advises solo entrepreneurs या single business owners कि how can they grow their business. And उसमें goal बहुत बड़ा नहीं होता. उसमें goal होता है कि how to reach $1 million, and then from there maybe how to reach $10 million. And most of these businesses are within that range, right?
Okay.
तो उसके लिए वो है.
Yeah, Nash, I believe we have 10 minutes and I want to focus on Integry and probably a few other questions. When you were raising money, for Integry, what were your considerations in terms of which investors to accept?
So originally what we did was we put in our own money. So it was the original founders at Pring. We put together money and we knew we had enough money for 10 months. And we knew हमारा burn था ज़्यादा नहीं था. So what we were able to do is कि हम अपना revenue बढ़ा के we basically start in with the thinking that we will not have to raise money. That's the starting point. उसके बाद क्या हुआ कि as we started the company, as we started gaining revenue, we realized that we can expand this further. We can gain more revenue. So we talked to a number of players. We were very fortunate early on. One of my seniors from GIKI, Athar Imran, he is the CEO at Cybrid, which is a Laxon Group company. And so he's a good friend of mine. And so he said, "Hey, you guys looking for investment?" And I said, "Yeah, that'd be great." And so long story short, people from the Laxton group or connected to the Laxton group, they invested money inside Integry as a starting point. And this is right after we got into the Alchemist. So Alchemist put in $60,000. So फिर हमने अपने $40,000 डाले, 60,000 वहाँ से आया, that was 1 lakh. And then the Laxton, the people from there, they invested around $100,000 from there. So that gave us enough runway for about a year and a half. And then that was a starting point. And then from there it snowballed. All the money we raised were from people who either understood the space in some sense, or they were engineering background, or they were technical people. So, for example, our investors include the original people at WhatsApp, the people who started WhatsApp. It include people from Lyft. It include people from the chief architect at Microsoft is an investor. The head of Google strategy is an investor. People from LinkedIn and so on. So we have like this fantastic group of people from there.
All these industry veterans, are they actively giving you good advice, sort of overseeing everything, guiding you all along, or how does that work?
100%. So what happens is these are people who are not just interested in giving their money, they're also very, very interested in helping a fast growing company. So this is something which is very exciting for them. So it's a lot of fun. So I can just call or email any one of these people, and they're more than happy to spend 5 hours a week with me, just talking about strategy, what they know. And it's really nice. And I will say a lot of these are Pakistanis as a starting point. But for example, मैंने आपको बताया कि मेरा senior थे Athar, he was the CEO of Cybrid. उन्होंने मुझे connect किया with Danish, who was in the Laxton group. He connected me to Samir, who was head of autonomous vehicles at Lyft. He connected me to his class fellow, I think from Stanford, who was the head of engineering at WhatsApp. And so if you trace this genealogy, you can actually, like, I reached the people at WhatsApp. The guy he was the number 4 guy at WhatsApp. They were the founders, and then this was the first engineering guy over there. So you can literally trace it down to my senior from GIKI. He let that ball in motion. But that's the essence of entrepreneurship. Every time everybody is more than willing to help. You have to find people who are more than willing to help you. And it's like a bahut log hain. Like and if you reach out to me, I'm at Nash on Twitter. I'm more than happy to help anybody here. Any question that they have, I'm more than happy to sort of reach out.
Wonderful. That is wonderful. And your handle is very easy to remember. Nash, Nash, Nash,
Yeah.
From the beautiful mind we all know, John Nash, And we have 5 minutes.
That's right.
We have 5 minutes. You've named a lot of people. I want you to talk about the few books that you read on entrepreneurship that really sort of caught your attention, and that the guys who are listening should check them out.
So one thing I would definitely say, if you are planning to become one of the best fast growing companies, one of the best people out there, if you're a CEO, you should be reading a book a week. Absolutely. You should be a voracious reader. If you just read one book though, if there's only one book, it's called The Startup Owner's Manual. It's by Professor Dr. Steve Blank. He wrote the ultimate book on starting a startup. And he also, I think he was the person who actually came with the concept of MVPs and minimal viable product. And Eric Ries took those concepts and he made them into more like a lean startup concept, Nicola, and all that. And so they're like easier pop versions of him, but he wrote the Bible. If you look at his book, if you read this book, that is the number one, the main book that you should read. However, like I was saying, you should be reading a book a week at least if you want to stay on top of your game.
Are you reading the books cover to cover, or are you going to the apps like Blinkist? How does that work for you?
Actually, I need to read the entire book. I cannot read shortcuts. And this is not absolutely a judgment. If you read Blinkist, that's perfectly fine. I spend about 3 hours a day studying. I spend 3 to 4 hours a day reading, whether that is in different forms.
How do you get that much time? How do you get that much time? Because I know you are raising a family as well, and you are managing a team, and you have raised money. That must be a lot of pressure. How do you manage that pressure and stress and still find a lot of time?
So a number of things over there. I think, so if I look at my screen time on my phone, we spend a lot of time just on Twitter and all these different places. And I was looking, if you just look at the amount of time we just waste, is significant. I think everybody has an hour or two a day easy that they can take out to study. I truly believe in that. And you can cut down Netflix, you can cut down YouTube, and you can move that time to that. That's one thing. As you become a founder, you have to become a master of your psychology. You have to understand what motivates you, what demotivates you. You have to understand when your energy is low, when your energy is high. So energy management is a very core part of being a successful entrepreneur. and there's a whole conversation to be had around discipline and motivation. There are a number of techniques I use to essentially manage myself. Key technique, I'll just tell you one of them is every morning when I wake up, I write 3 pages down. They're called morning pages or 750 words. And when you write those things down, you will it's a very good way of clearing your head. It's a very good way of writing things down, things which are either you're excited about, things that are bothering you, things that are on the top of your head. And so it's a really great technique to sort of run your brain, like sort of like debugging your brain, sort of seeing it out, what are the things that are bothering me, what are the things that are exciting me. And once you get some things down on paper, it exits your system. And so if you're under pressure, if you're in tension, you write those things down, you create a plan. And so once you create a plan, you become confident that you can sort of handle this. And that's just one thing that you can do. There are many other things that you should be able to do in regards to managing all of this.
Thank you very much. It is, I was very excited, but it's the meeting, and the talk is a lot more than my expectation. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
Appreciate
and
that.
I know I will come back. I will come back and I request you to come here again.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to document a bit of the history here. And but my goal here is we should be able to equip the next generation of entrepreneurs from Pakistan on the mistakes we did and the right things that they have to do going forward. And so that is very exciting to me. And I think that it is our responsibility to better educate the next generation. And any way that we can do that, I think that is a way for us to give back to the ecosystem.
Agree with you 110% with that. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you. Take care, Amir.